The way America votes is simple. Go to the polls, fill a bubble, and put a slip of paper in a machine. This method needs to be as easy as possible so 100 million people can vote without getting bored, confused, or feral. That's why in the United States we have something called first past the post. Here's what you do. Go to the polls, vote for one candidate on the ballot, and whoever gets the most votes wins the election. That's it. I really don't know how else to explain it. We use this system for nearly every elected office, and it's easy to see why. It's simple to commit to memory and quick to count the votes. It's cheap and doesn't require any fancy tech to implement. But just because it's easy to understand doesn't mean it's the best system. In fact, it's one of the worst, for one big reason. You don't need a majority of people to vote for you in order to win, just the largest number, whether that's 90% of the vote or 9%. Take a race with two candidates. Purple gets 59%, orange gets 41%. So far, the system is running just fine since the majority wanted purple is what they get. But what if we brought in a third candidate, who agrees with purple on most issues, but not all? They run in the next race and get 29% of the vote, completely out of purple voters. Since orange now has the most votes, he wins the election. This is the spoiler effect, and is the biggest problem with first past the post. Let's look at one more example. Many people look at this result as a stunning output for their parties, and would seek to emulate their success. Two contenders see orange's base as having the most potential and decide to court their voters. The result looks like this, with purple having regained power, but this time with 70% of the electorate voting against him. The worst part? This was a real election that happened in 1896. It's no wonder we don't see this anymore, because instead of seeking reforms to make elections reflect the interests of constituents, parties seek to stamp out these groups so they don't lose voters. This is why we have a two-party system. Instead of changing the rules to foster coalitions, big parties marginalize potential allies, shame voters who don't compromise on their beliefs, and bend the rules in their favor. The two big parties disagree on almost every issue except one. They are the only ones fit for the job. This system is fixable, and there's a few others we already use. Georgia has a two-round system. It's almost exactly like first past the post, but if no one gets a majority in the first round, then the top two go head-to-head in a second round. This would be useful if it ever happened, which it never does because Georgia has effectively no third parties. Let's try another. So this entire time we were assuming each party fielded only one candidate for the election. That's what primaries are for. But 3 states have jungle primaries, where the top 2 move on to the second round, just like in Georgia, but all candidates from every party run against each other in the first round. This can result in some funny situations, like runoff elections that only feature members of the same party, or characters that don't get much vetting from party insiders. So far, the alternatives haven't given us much. One system doesn't have the political climate to make a difference, and the other is so wild and random that even the big parties don't want it. Neither gets rid of the enormous advantage incumbents tend to have, and both requires voters to come in twice. But there is one more solution, recently passed in Maine: ranked choice voting. Now, this system is a little complex, so let's lay down everything you need to do. When you go to vote, pick your first favorite choice, your second choice, and your third. Go home. When the polls close, all the first choices get tallied up. If someone got a majority, the election's over, because we already know who most people would be happiest with. If not, then it's possible most people wouldn't be happy with the first choice winner, so this happens. Whoever gets last place is eliminated, and their voters whose first choice was cut get redistributed to their second choices. If there's still no majority, then the next place gets knocked out and their votes get redistributed again. This process repeats until someone gets a majority and wins the election. This system is good because it requires a majority out of the winner, whether that be from all first choice votes or from a coalition of first, second, and third choice voters. Some people criticize this system as not providing real majorities, but all these votes are an indicator of who they would have voted for had these candidates never run. RCV does its best to make sure as many votes as possible are not thrown out by the end. The only votes that are votes who had all of their choices knocked out. This happens when some voters choose not to rank every single candidate on their ballot, but only the ones they like, which is a perfectly valid vote. Not to mention that with this system, your vote will not be wasted on a candidate that you know will lose, because your voice will still be heard through your next choice votes. So those are the voting systems we use in the United States. 3 are terrible, 1's okay. Stick around and we'll talk about alternatives that are just plain good.